People like you should stay invisible." The words sliced across the restaurant so sharply that even the violinist near the grand piano missed a note. Crystal glasses paused halfway to polished lips. Silverware stopped clinking against porcelain. 40 floors above Manhattan, inside the gold-lit private dining room of the Sterling Crown Hotel, silence spread like smoke beneath the chandeliers. Evelyn Brooks stood motionless beside the table, one hand still wrapped around the neck of a Bordeaux bottle that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A thin ribbon of dark red wine had slipped onto the white linen tablecloth during the pour. Barely a few drops. But to Nathaniel Sterling, billionaire owner of Sterling International, it was enough to trigger the storm already burning beneath his tailored composure. "Do you have any idea who's sitting at this table?" he asked coldly, his voice low enough to sting harder than shouting. Evelyn lowered the bottle carefully onto the silver tray balanced against her arm. "Yes, sir," she answered softly. "Then maybe try acting like it matters." A few uncomfortable glances flickered around the room. Men worth billions suddenly found intense interest in their steak knives. Somewhere near the windows overlooking Central Park, a woman shifted awkwardly in diamonds that glittered like frost beneath the amber light. Evelyn nodded once. Calm, controlled, not embarrassed. That seemed to irritate Nathaniel even more. He had built his empire on precision. Hotels, resorts, luxury towers across 3 continents. Everything perfect, everything controlled. And tonight mattered more than most. Henri Beaumont sat across from him, fingers resting lightly against the stem of a crystal wine glass. The French investor rarely traveled to the United States, and rumors said he had walked away from billion-dollar negotiations over a waiter mispronouncing his late wife's name once in Monaco. Nathaniel had spent 6 months arranging this dinner. 6 months chasing a partnership that could triple Sterling International's European expansion overnight. And now a waitress had interrupted the rhythm of the evening. Nathaniel exhaled slowly and adjusted the cuff of his charcoal suit. "Clean it up," he said dismissively. "And next time, try not to make yourself part of the entertainment." Evelyn reached for the linen napkin, but before her fingers touched the table, another sound cut through the stillness. A quiet voice. Calm, measured, French. "Interesting," Henri Beaumont murmured without looking up. "A man can spend billions building beautiful rooms and still fail to learn how to speak to people inside them." Nathaniel's smile tightened instantly. He recognized enough French to catch the tone, but not enough to understand every word. Across the table, 2 executives exchanged nervous glances. Henri lifted his wine glass slowly, studying the reflection of the chandeliers inside the dark liquid. "My wife used to say," he continued in French, "that arrogance is the quickest way to make luxury feel cheap." Nathaniel's jaw shifted slightly. "Mr. Beaumont," he began carefully, forcing a diplomatic smile, "I apologize for the interruption." But Henri didn't answer him. His eyes had drifted toward Evelyn instead, toward the waitress standing silently beside the table in her fitted black uniform and simple silver necklace resting against her collarbone. Then came the moment that stopped the room completely. Evelyn looked directly at Henri Beaumont and answered him in flawless Parisian French. "Your wife was absolutely right, sir," she said gently. "Elegance has very little to do with money." The billionaire fell silent. The air inside the private dining room changed so suddenly it felt as though someone had opened a hidden window to winter. Nathaniel Sterling remained perfectly still at the head of the table, one hand resting beside his untouched glass of wine, while the last echoes of Evelyn Brooks's French words lingered beneath the chandeliers. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the violinist near the grand piano had stopped completely now, his bow hovering uncertainly above the strings. Henri Beaumont leaned back slowly in his chair, studying Evelyn with visible curiosity. "Paris," he said in French, his voice softer this time. "Not schoolbook French. Real Paris." Evelyn lowered her eyes respectfully. "Yes, sir." Nathaniel's gaze snapped toward her. For the first time that evening, there was no irritation in his expression. Only confusion. Sharp confusion. "You speak French?" he asked carefully. Evelyn turned toward him at last. "I do, sir." The simplicity of her answer somehow unsettled him more than if she had defended herself. One of the executives near the end of the table gave an awkward laugh. "Well," he muttered nervously, "that certainly explains tonight's surprise." But Henri did not smile. He kept watching Evelyn as though trying to solve a memory standing right in front of him. Tell me, he asked her in French again. Where did you learn to speak like that? Nathaniel could only catch fragments now. His jaw tightened slightly. Across the room, waitstaff stood frozen near the service doors, pretending not to stare. Evelyn hesitated just long enough for the silence to grow heavy. At the Sorbonne, she answered quietly. The room shifted again. Nathaniel blinked once. One of the investors nearly dropped his fork against the china plate. Sorbonne. The name landed at the table with more force than shouting ever could have. Henri Beaumont slowly lowered his wine glass. You studied in Paris? He asked. Evelyn nodded gently. A long time ago. Nathaniel stared at her as though seeing an entirely different person standing beside the table now. Not a waitress balancing silver trays beneath hotel lights. Not part of the background. Something else. Someone else. He looked at the simple black uniform she wore. The silver necklace resting near her collarbone. The calmness in her posture. Suddenly, every detail felt incomplete, like he had only read the first line of a much larger story. Henry's expression softened unexpectedly. My wife attended the Sorbonne, he said. Literature and political philosophy. A flicker crossed Evelyn's face. Small. Almost invisible. Camille Beaumont, she said carefully. I know. Henri froze. The executives looked between them, completely lost now. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. You knew Mrs. Beaumont? Henri asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn nodded once. Not personally, but she gave a guest lecture during my second year. Henry's fingers tightened faintly around the stem of his glass. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, snow had begun drifting across Manhattan in soft white spirals, coating the streets nearly 40 stories below. She spoke about dignity. Evelyn continued gently in French. She said the way powerful people treat workers tells you everything about who they are when nobody important is watching. Nathaniel felt something cold settle in his chest. Henri looked down at the untouched wine in front of him. She used to say that often, he murmured. The silence that followed no longer felt awkward. It felt personal, intimate in a way business dinners were never supposed to become. Then Nathaniel cleared his throat carefully, trying to regain control of a room that no longer entirely belonged to him. Miss Brooks, he said slowly, perhaps you should join us for a moment. Several heads lifted instantly around the table. Evelyn looked genuinely surprised. Sir. Nathaniel glanced toward the empty chair halfway down the table. Please, he said quietly this time. Sit. For a moment, nobody at the table seemed to understand what Nathaniel Sterling had just done. The empty chair beside the French investors sat untouched beneath the warm chandelier light, its polished silverware gleaming against folded linen, while Evelyn Brooks remained standing beside the table with her serving tray still balanced carefully against her hip. Somewhere behind the service doors, a champagne flute shattered faintly in the distance, followed by hurried whispers from the kitchen staff. Nathaniel ignored all of it. His attention stayed fixed on Evelyn. Please, he repeated quietly. Sit down. Henri Beaumont watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, almost amused now. Evelyn hesitated before placing the tray gently onto a nearby service stand. Every movement she made carried a calm precision that suddenly seemed impossible for Nathaniel to overlook. She took the empty chair slowly, smoothing her black uniform as she sat at a table where people spent more money in one evening than most families earned in a year. Yet somehow she looked more comfortable than half the executives present. One investor cleared his throat awkwardly. Another reached for wine he no longer seemed interested in drinking. Nathaniel adjusted the sleeve of his tailored jacket, trying to regain the authority that had slipped from his grasp the moment Evelyn opened her mouth in flawless French. You attended the Sorbonne, he said carefully. What did you study? Evelyn folded her hands lightly in her lap. International relations and cultural diplomacy. Silence again. The words landed heavily against crystal and marble. Nathaniel stared at her. Diplomacy, he repeated. And now you work evening service at my hotel. There was no mockery in his tone this time. Only genuine confusion. Evelyn gave a small nod. Life changes quickly, Mr. Sterling. Henri Beaumont leaned forward slightly. You speak as if you have known disappointment, he said softly in French. Evelyn smiled faintly, but it never fully reached her eyes. Most adults do eventually. Henri studied her for another long second before something in his expression shifted. He reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal overcoat draped across the chair beside him and slowly removed an old photograph. The edges were worn soft with age. He slid it carefully across the table toward Evelyn. Nathaniel glanced down. A younger Henri stood beside an elegant black woman outside a stone university building in Paris. Snow dusted the sidewalk behind them. She was laughing at something beyond the camera, one hand gripping a stack of books against a wool coat. Evelyn's breath caught softly. "Camille," she whispered. Henri nodded. 27 years ago. Nathaniel had never seen the French billionaire look vulnerable before. Men like Henri Beaumont appeared in magazines beside yachts and private jets, not old photographs with grief hidden quietly in their eyes. She loved that university, Henri said. She believed education was the one thing nobody could take away from a person. Evelyn looked at the photograph carefully, almost reverently. "She told us something during her lecture," Evelyn said. "I still remember it word for word." Henri leaned forward. Around them, every conversation in the private dining room had disappeared completely now. Even the waitstaff lingered near the walls pretending to polish glasses while secretly listening. Evelyn lifted her eyes toward Henri. She said, "Dignity is not something rich people give to poor people," she said softly in French. "It is something every human being deserves before they even walk into the room." Henri closed his eyes briefly. Nathaniel looked down at the untouched wine in front of him. The reflection trembling inside the glass suddenly made him uncomfortable, because for the first time all evening, he could hear his own words repeating back at him. "People like you should stay invisible." The sentence now sounded uglier than he remembered speaking it. Then Henri Beaumont slowly turned toward Nathaniel and asked one quiet question in English that hit harder than any public humiliation ever could. "Tell me, Mr. Sterling, when did success make you forget how to see people?" The question settled over the private dining room heavier than the snowfall outside the windows. Nathaniel Sterling did not answer immediately. The glow from the chandeliers reflected faintly across the polished table, while every executive around him suddenly found great interest in avoiding eye contact. Even the low hum of Manhattan traffic 40 floors below seemed impossibly far away now. Henri Beaumont remained calm, one hand resting beside the old photograph of his late wife. Evelyn Brooks sat quietly near the center of the table, her posture composed, though she could feel the tension pulling tighter through the room like invisible wire. Nathaniel finally leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly through his nose. "I did not invite everyone here tonight for philosophy," he said carefully. His voice was controlled again, but softer now, less certain. Henri tilted his head slightly. "No," he replied. "You invited us here for trust." Nathaniel's fingers tapped once against the stem of his wine glass before stopping completely. Across the room, the violinist quietly resumed playing, but even the music sounded cautious now, drifting through the restaurant like something afraid to interrupt. "Mr. Beaumont," Nathaniel began, "if my behavior toward my staff appeared disrespectful, then I will address it privately." Henry's eyes narrowed just enough to reveal disappointment. "Privately," he repeated. "That is convenient." Evelyn lowered her gaze toward the folded napkin in front of her. She did not want to become the center of whatever this dinner was turning into. Yet somehow the entire evening kept orbiting back toward her. Nathaniel noticed. "Miss Brooks," he said, turning toward her, "I assume you did not expect any of this tonight." Evelyn gave the smallest shake of her head. "No, sir." "Then why defend me?" Nathaniel asked quietly. The question caught even Henri by surprise. Evelyn looked up slowly. "Sir, you could have embarrassed me." Nathaniel's expression tightened slightly. "Instead, you translated carefully. You softened what Mr. Beaumont actually said." Henri glanced toward her with sudden curiosity. Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Because public humiliation rarely teaches people anything good." The words landed gently, but Nathaniel felt them harder than criticism. He stared at her for a long moment. "You think I humiliated you?" Evelyn met his eyes calmly. "I think you were angry." "That is not an answer." She folded her hands together lightly. "No, Mr. Sterling," she said softly. "You did not humiliate me. You revealed yourself." Silence again. One of the executives shifted so abruptly his chair scraped the marble floor. Nathaniel looked away first. Outside, snow continued falling over Manhattan in thick white swirls beneath the city lights. The windows of nearby skyscrapers glowed gold against the storm like distant lanterns floating in darkness. Henri Beaumont slowly smiled for the first time all evening. Not a businessman's smile. A human one. "Camille would have liked you very much," he told Evelyn quietly. Something flickered across Evelyn's face then. A sadness she quickly tucked away behind composure. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. Before he could ask anything else, Claire Sterling suddenly appeared beside the table, her navy evening coat still dusted with snowflakes from outside. Nathaniel's younger sister glanced around the tense dining room with visible confusion. "Well," she said carefully, "either I walked into a merger negotiation or a hostage situation." A few nervous laughs escaped around the table. The pressure eased slightly. Claire stepped closer toward Nathaniel, then paused when she noticed Evelyn seated among the investors. Her eyebrows lifted. "Interesting," she murmured. Nathaniel rubbed a hand slowly across his jaw. "Claire, this is Evelyn Brooks." Claire extended her hand instantly, without hesitation. "Anyone who managed to silence my brother at his own dinner automatically earns my respect." Evelyn shook her hand politely. Then Claire glanced at the old photograph near Henri Beaumont's glass. Her expression shifted. "Wait," she said softly. "Is that Camille Beaumont?" Henri nodded once. Claire looked toward Evelyn again, curiosity growing sharper now. "And how exactly does a hotel waitress know about Camille Beaumont?" Evelyn opened her mouth slightly, but before she could answer, Henri spoke first. "That," the French billionaire said quietly, "is beginning to interest me very much as well." The dinner continued, but the balance inside the room had shifted too far to ignore. Conversations restarted in careful fragments beneath the glow of the chandeliers while servers moved quietly between tables carrying silver trays and steaming plates, though every glance still drifted back toward Evelyn Brooks. Nathaniel Sterling could feel it happening around him. The investors who usually waited for his approval before speaking now watched someone else with curiosity. Respect. Even Henri Beaumont no longer looked interested in the architectural renderings spread near the center of the table. His attention remained fixed on Evelyn, as though she represented something far more valuable than numbers. Claire Sterling settled into the empty seat beside her brother, removing her gloves slowly while studying Evelyn with open fascination. "You still have not answered the question," Claire said gently. "How does someone go from the Sorbonne to evening service at a Manhattan hotel?" Evelyn reached for her water glass, buying herself a second before answering. "The same way most people change directions," she said quietly. "Family." Nathaniel glanced toward her. Something in the word softened the sharpness still lingering in the room. Henri folded his hands together. "Your parents?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head once. "My mother." Outside the windows, snow drifted heavier now, coating the city streets below in white ribbons of light and shadow. Somewhere near the far end of the dining room, a jazz pianist replaced the violinist with a slower melody that rapped softly through the air like smoke. Nathaniel noticed Evelyn's eyes flick briefly toward the music before returning to the table. "You left Paris for her," Claire guessed. Evelyn nodded. "She became sick during my final year." "And you never went back?" Nathaniel asked before he could stop himself. Evelyn looked down at the silver necklace resting against her uniform collar. "No, sir." Henri Beaumont's expression darkened with quiet understanding. "Alzheimer's?" Evelyn looked surprised. "Yes." Henri exhaled softly through his nose and leaned back in his chair. Camille's mother had the same illness. The room fell quieter again, though not tense this time. Human. Real. Nathaniel studied Evelyn carefully now, noticing details he should have seen earlier. The exhaustion hidden beneath her calm expression. The tiny wear marks near the cuff of her uniform sleeves. The way she spoke with discipline instead of self-pity. He suddenly realized he knew almost nothing about the people who worked inside the empire carrying his name. Claire tilted her head slightly. "You gave up a diplomatic career to care for your mother full-time?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "There was not much choice." "There is always a choice," Nathaniel said automatically. Evelyn turned toward him gently. "Not when the person who raised you begins forgetting your name." Nathaniel went silent. Across the table, one of the executives quietly lowered his eyes. Henri Beaumont reached for his wine at last, but did not drink it. "Camille used to fear that illness more than death itself," he murmured. "She said forgetting the people you love would feel like losing them twice." Evelyn nodded slowly. Your wife spoke beautifully. Henry's eyes softened with grief that time had never fully erased. She would have liked hearing that. Nathaniel looked toward the old photograph still resting near Henry's hand. For the first time all evening, business no longer felt like the center of the night. Something else had taken its place. Something uncomfortable and strangely necessary. Then a young hotel manager hurried nervously toward the table from the service hallway, tablet trembling slightly in his hands. He stopped beside Nathaniel and lowered his voice. Sir, I apologize for interrupting, but the Zurich investors just arrived unexpectedly downstairs. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Of course they had. Another negotiation. Another performance. Another room where he was expected to control every detail perfectly. But before he could answer, Henri Beaumont spoke calmly without taking his eyes off Evelyn. Send them away. The manager froze. Nathaniel looked up sharply. Henri, no. Henri interrupted softly. Tonight, I would rather continue speaking with the only honest person at this table. The young manager stood frozen beside the table, still clutching his tablet against his chest, as if hoping someone else would make the decision for him. Snow pressed softly against the towering windows behind the dining room, turning Manhattan into a blur of silver lights and white shadows far below. Henri Beaumont reached calmly for his water glass. You heard me, he said without raising his voice. Tell the Zurich investors tonight will not work. The manager looked immediately toward Nathaniel Sterling for rescue. Nathaniel remained silent for one long second before finally giving a small nod. Reschedule them for tomorrow morning. Relief flashed across the manager's face. Yes, sir. He disappeared quickly toward the elevators, leaving the strange stillness behind him once again. Claire Sterling leaned back slightly in her chair, studying Henri with amusement. You just postponed a $40 million meeting for conversation. Henri gave the faintest shrug. Money is rarely the most valuable thing in a room. Nathaniel heard the sentence clearly. This time there was no missing the meaning beneath it. Across the table, Evelyn Brooks looked deeply, uncomfortable with the attention now surrounding her. She gently adjusted the cuff of her black uniform sleeve and glanced toward the service hallway where the other staff continued pretending not to stare. Mr. Beaumont, she said softly, I should probably return to work. Why? Henri asked simply. Evelyn blinked slightly. Because I am working. Henri rested his elbows lightly against the tablecloth. And yet you are the only person here who has not tried selling me something tonight. A few executives exchanged awkward glances at that. Nathaniel slowly loosened his tie beneath the collar of his crisp white shirt. For years he had admired Henri Beaumont's reputation for ruthless negotiation. Tonight, however, the older billionaire seemed interested in something entirely different. Tell me something honestly, Miss Brooks, Henri continued. When you first heard Mr. Sterling speaking to you tonight, what did you think? The question hung dangerously in the air. Nathaniel's expression tightened almost instantly, but Evelyn did not answer right away. She looked toward the snow outside the windows instead, watching flakes swirl against the glass beneath the city lights. I thought he was tired, she said finally. Nathaniel looked genuinely surprised. Henri raised an eyebrow. Not arrogant. Evelyn shook her head softly. People who feel important usually want to be seen. People who feel exhausted want control. The words settled over Nathaniel like cold rain. Claire glanced toward her brother slowly. Well, she murmured under her breath. That one probably hurt more than arrogance. A few quiet laughs escaped around the table, including one from Henri himself. Nathaniel rubbed a hand across his jaw again, but this time he almost smiled despite himself. Almost. Then Henry's attention shifted toward the silver necklace resting near Evelyn's collarbone. May I ask about the pendant? He said gently. Evelyn touched it instinctively with 2 fingers. A small gold emblem, shaped like an open book beneath a laurel branch. It was a graduation gift from my mother, she answered quietly. Henri studied it carefully. Sorbonne honors seal. Nathaniel looked at the necklace. Again, suddenly realizing how many details he had overlooked in plain sight. He remembered seeing it earlier beneath the chandelier light and dismissing it as simple jewelry. Now everything about Evelyn seemed to carry hidden meaning. Claire leaned forward with growing curiosity. You actually graduated? Evelyn nodded once. Top of my class. Silence again. One executive nearly choked on his wine. Nathaniel stared at her openly now. And nobody here knew that. Evelyn offered a small smile that held no bitterness at all. Nobody asked. The sentence struck the room harder than raised voices ever could have. Somewhere near the back of the restaurant, dishes clinked softly inside the kitchen. The jazz piano continued drifting through the air while snow thickened against the skyline beyond the glass. Nathaniel suddenly became aware of how strange this evening had become. He had entered the dinner expecting admiration, negotiation, control. Instead, every layer of certainty around him was quietly peeling away one sentence at a time. Then Claire noticed something tucked partially inside Evelyn's apron pocket. A folded cream-colored envelope with blue foreign stamps lining the edge. "Paris?" Claire asked softly. Evelyn's expression changed instantly. Small. Guarded. She slid the envelope deeper into her pocket. But Henri Beaumont had already seen it too. "That letter," he said carefully in French. "You never mailed it, did you?" The moment Henri Beaumont mentioned the letter, the warmth inside the private dining room seemed to fade beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers. Evelyn Brooks kept one hand lightly against the folded envelope hidden inside her apron pocket while snow continued drifting past the towering windows behind her. Nathaniel Sterling noticed the change in her expression immediately. Until now she had answered every question with quiet composure. But this was different. Guarded. Personal. Claire Sterling leaned forward slightly in her chair. "You never mailed it?" she asked gently. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the tablecloth. "No." Henri studied her carefully. "A letter back to Paris?" Evelyn nodded once. Nathaniel watched her fingers tighten, faintly around the edge of the envelope beneath the fabric. It was the first visible sign of nervousness she had shown all evening. "What was in it?" Claire asked softly. Evelyn gave a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "A resignation." Nathaniel blinked. "From what?" Evelyn looked toward him at last. "The United Nations Fellowship Program." Silence swept across the table again, so completely that even the piano music near the restaurant bar seemed to disappear for a moment. One of the executives actually lowered his fork onto the plate with a quiet clink, too stunned to continue eating. Nathaniel stared at Evelyn as if the sentence had physically shifted the room beneath him. "You were accepted into the United Nations Diplomatic Fellowship," he asked carefully. Evelyn nodded. "The Paris office." Claire slowly leaned back against her chair. "That program accepts almost nobody." "I know," Evelyn answered softly. Henri Beaumont's expression darkened with understanding. "And you declined it for your mother." Evelyn remained quiet for a second before speaking. "At first I thought it would only be temporary. A few months." Then her condition worsened. Snow brushed against the glass behind them in soft white streaks while candlelight flickered across polished silver and crystal. Nathaniel could not stop looking at the envelope tucked inside her pocket now. He imagined it sitting unopened somewhere in a drawer for years while she carried trays through crowded dining rooms beneath the weight of a life interrupted. "You kept the letter all this time?" he asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Sometimes people keep reminders of who they used to be." The words landed heavily inside Nathaniel's chest. He looked down at his own reflection, trembling faintly in the untouched wine beside him. Somewhere along the way, he realized, he had stopped keeping reminders entirely. Henri reached slowly toward the old photograph of Camille resting near his plate. "My wife once turned down a publishing contract to care for her father after his stroke," he said quietly. "She never regretted it. But she mourned it sometimes." Evelyn's eyes softened. "You can love someone deeply and still grieve the life you lost." Henri nodded slowly. "Yes, exactly that." Claire glanced between them with growing emotion hidden behind her calm expression. Nathaniel remained silent longer than anyone expected. Then finally he asked the question sitting beneath everything else. "Why work here?" Evelyn looked genuinely confused. "Sir." Nathaniel gestured lightly toward the dining room around them. The chandeliers. The marble floors. The executives in tailored suits pretending not to eavesdrop. "With your education, your experience, your talent. Why this?" Evelyn turned toward the windows overlooking Manhattan. The city glowed beneath the snowstorm like scattered gold beneath ice. "Because hospitals do not care about unrealized potential," she said quietly. "Medication costs what it costs. Rent costs what it costs. Caregivers cost what they cost." Nobody spoke after that. Nathaniel felt heat crawl slowly into his face. Earlier that evening he had looked at her and seen inconvenience. Nothing more. The realization made him deeply uncomfortable now. Then Evelyn carefully pulled the envelope halfway from her pocket. The cream paper had softened with age at the edges. Blue Paris stamps lined the corner beneath faded ink. She looked down at it for a long second before speaking almost to herself. I carried it for years because I thought one day I might still go back. Henri Beaumont watched her quietly. And now, Evelyn folded the letter gently between her fingers. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Now I am not sure Paris remembers me anymore. Nathaniel looked directly at her then and answered before he could stop himself. I do not think places forget people like you. For several seconds after Nathaniel Sterling spoke, nobody at the table moved. The words seemed to hang quietly beneath the chandeliers while snow continued falling over Manhattan beyond the towering glass windows. Evelyn Brooks looked at him carefully, almost as if she was trying to decide whether he truly meant what he had said or whether guilt had simply softened him for the evening. Nathaniel felt strangely exposed beneath that calm gaze. Across the table, Henri Beaumont slowly lifted his wine glass at last and took the first sip he had touched all night. There, the French billionaire murmured softly. That sounded more like a human being. A few quiet laughs broke through the tension around the table, gentle enough to loosen the atmosphere without fully erasing the emotional weight still resting there. Claire Sterling leaned toward her brother slightly. I should probably frame this night, she whispered. You apologized to a waitress and survived it. Nathaniel gave her a tired look, but even he could not completely suppress the faint smile threatening at the corner of his mouth. It disappeared quickly when his eyes drifted back toward Evelyn. She was carefully folding the old Paris letter again, smoothing the worn paper with surprising tenderness before slipping it back into her apron pocket. Do you ever read it? Nathaniel asked quietly. Evelyn nodded once. Usually on difficult days. Why? She looked toward the snow outside the windows. To remind myself I was once brave enough to dream very far away. The sentence settled heavily over him. Nathaniel suddenly realized he could not remember the last time he had dreamed about anything at all. His life had become acquisitions, projections, contracts, flights, meetings. Endless motion without reflection. Across the room, the jazz pianist shifted into a softer melody while waitstaff quietly refreshed candles along the walls. The golden light flickered gently across crystal glasses and silverware, making the entire dining room feel strangely suspended outside time. Henri Beaumont leaned back in his chair, studying Nathaniel carefully now instead of Evelyn. You know, he said calmly, before tonight, I was planning to walk away from this partnership. Several executives visibly stiffened. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Because of the dinner? Henri shook his head. Because every conversation with Sterling International felt polished but empty. Efficient. Impressive, but empty. Nathaniel remained silent. Henri gestured lightly toward Evelyn. Then your waitress reminded me something still human exists inside this building. Nathaniel looked down slowly at the tablecloth before him. The irony pressed painfully against his chest. The very person he had dismissed at the beginning of the evening had become the reason his largest international deal might survive. Claire folded her arms thoughtfully. That has to be the most expensive lesson in humility anyone has ever received over wine. Henri smiled faintly. Perhaps. Then he turned toward Evelyn again. Miss Brooks, if circumstances had been different, what would you have wanted? Evelyn blinked slightly at the question. Wanted? Your ideal future. She hesitated for several seconds. Nathaniel noticed how carefully she considered the answer, as though she had not allowed herself to think about it in years. I think, she said quietly, I would have wanted work that mattered to people beyond profit. Nathaniel absorbed the sentence without speaking. Diplomacy? Henri asked gently. Evelyn nodded. Helping people communicate before they stop seeing each other as human beings. The room grew still again. Nathaniel almost laughed at the painful perfection of it. Tonight she had done exactly that for him. Then Claire noticed something else tucked beneath the edge of Evelyn's sleeve as she reached for her water glass. A hospital visitor bracelet. Faded. Wrinkled from weeks of wear. Claire's expression softened instantly. Your mother is in the hospital now. Evelyn glanced down at the bracelet before answering. Memorial Care Center in Brooklyn. Nathaniel looked sharply toward her. Tonight. Evelyn gave a small nod. I came here straight from visiting hours. The words hit him harder than anything else had all evening. He pictured her crossing the snowy city after sitting beside a hospital bed for hours, then being publicly spoken to like she was invisible the moment she arrived at work. Shame tightened slowly inside his chest. Real shame this time. Then Henri Beaumont carefully set down his wine glass and looked directly at Nathaniel. "I think," the older billionaire said softly, "you owe this woman far more than an apology." The words lingered heavily over the private dining room long after Henri Beaumont finished speaking. Nathaniel Sterling sat motionless at the head of the table while candlelight trembled softly against crystal glasses and falling snow blurred the Manhattan skyline beyond the windows. Around him, executives lowered their eyes toward untouched meals and half-empty wine glasses, suddenly aware they were witnessing something far more personal than business. Evelyn Brooks remained quiet beside them, one hand resting lightly against the faded hospital bracelet near her wrist. Nathaniel could not stop looking at it. Memorial Care Center, Brooklyn. He imagined fluorescent hospital lights replacing the golden glow of chandeliers. Plastic chairs instead of velvet dining booths. Machines humming quietly through the night, while Evelyn sat beside her mother before rushing across the city to begin another shift serving people who barely noticed her existence. And then he remembered his own voice from earlier. "People like you should stay invisible." Shame pressed against his chest so sharply he could barely sit with it. Henri Beaumont slowly folded the old photograph of Camille and returned it to his coat pocket. "My wife believed something very simple," he said quietly. "The measure of a powerful person is not how they speak to investors. It is how they speak to someone who cannot benefit them." Nathaniel lowered his gaze. Claire Sterling watched her brother carefully, seeing something unfamiliar breaking through the polished control he had carried for years. Finally, Nathaniel stood from the table. The movement instantly silenced the room again. He looked toward Evelyn, and for the first time since the evening began, there was no authority left in his posture. No performance. Only honesty stripped painfully bare. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "earlier tonight I spoke to you in a way no human being deserves." Evelyn remained still. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "I looked at your uniform and assumed that was your entire story." His voice tightened slightly. "That failure belongs to me." Nobody moved. Even the piano near the restaurant bar had gone silent again. Nathaniel reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and removed a slim silver business card holder. He pulled out a single card and placed it carefully on the white tablecloth in front of Evelyn. "Tomorrow morning," he said softly, "Sterling International opens a new cultural relations division for our European properties." Claire's eyes widened slightly. Nathaniel had not mentioned any such division before tonight. "The position would report directly to my office," he continued. "International guest relations, diplomatic partnerships, multilingual training." He looked directly at Evelyn. "It should belong to someone who understands people better than I do." Evelyn stared quietly at the card resting beneath the candlelight. Her expression held more surprise than excitement. "Mr. Sterling," Nathaniel shook his head gently. "No, let me finish." Snow drifted heavier outside the windows now, whitening the city below until Manhattan looked almost unreal beneath the storm. "You reminded me tonight that success means nothing if it costs your humanity," he said. "And I do not want to become the kind of man who forgets that again." Henri Beaumont slowly smiled into his wine glass. Claire looked suspiciously emotional for someone trying hard not to show it. Evelyn glanced down at the silver card but did not pick it up immediately. "And if I say no?" she asked softly. Nathaniel gave the faintest smile then. "Tired, honest, human. Then I spend the rest of my life grateful you taught me something anyway." For a second, Evelyn simply looked at him beneath the warm chandelier light while snow fell endlessly beyond the glass. Then, very slowly, she picked up the card between her fingers. Across the room, the pianist began playing again. Soft, gentle, almost hopeful. And somewhere inside the silence between them, the balance of power disappeared completely, replaced by something far rarer than business, pride, or wealth. Respect.